Brendan Dassey, trial transcript, day 2, page 228. Fallon's continued questioning of Olson. First thing I did was just examine that skull fragment under my normal stereo microscope to see what the surface looked like, to see if I could see any metallic metal present. I then mounted the item on a scanning electron microscope that uses energy dispersed X-rays to do elemental analysis on the areas. And I was specifically interested in the areas around the entrance defect, both on the inner surface and on the inward beveling. All right. And what was the condition of the fragment that you examined? It was heavily charred, and it was brittle. All right. And did you take any special precautions in handling the matter prior to subjecting it to testing? Just handled with gloves and was gentle with it. All right. And subsequent to your examination of that item, did you receive other fragments from Dr. Eisenberg to examine? In November, November 17, 2006, I received 2 other charred cranial pieces from Dr. Eisenberg. All right, and what were those items designated? Those items were designated item KQ and KR. All right, and describe, if you would, item KQ in a little more detail, would you please? Item KQ was a smaller bone fragment than item EJ. It also had an entrance defect present. And what was interesting from Dr. Eisenberg's standpoint and my standpoint was the x-rays of that item showed some tiny little bright spots present in the x-ray, which usually means there's some type of dense metal there. All right, I'm going to show you one more photograph, 137. Do you recognize that? Yes, Exhibit 137 is the outer surface of item KQ, showing the entrance defect with the beveled edge. All right, and you mentioned something also about some x-rays. I'm going to have you have 2 more exhibits provided to you, 138 and 139. Beginning with 138, do you recognize 138? Exhibit 138 appears to be an x-ray image of item EJ, the first skull fragment that I examined. All right, I'm showing the inner surface. All right, and now you mentioned before we, well, yeah, all right, let's go to the next one. Exhibit 139, 9. And directing your attention to the piece in the upper left-hand corner of that exhibit, do you recognize that? Yes, I do. All right, and what is that? Exhibit 139 is an X-ray image of 8 bone fragments, and specifically the one in the upper left-hand corner, which has an entrance defect, shows some bright spots right on the edge of that entrance defect, both on the beveled edge and inside of the beveling. All right, now that looks different than item 137, and if you can explain to us the apparent difference. 137 shows this smaller bone fragment with the entrance defect attached to some more bone fragments. And that attachment is done after these x-rays were taken when Dr. Eisenberg was putting together the pieces to try to put the bone fragments back together to what they originally were. Hence the designation cranial refit? Correct. All right. Well, let's start then with the exhibit with the X-ray of the last one, 138, 139. Oh, 139. I'm sorry. There we go. All right. Now, directing your attention to the zoomed-in picture of 139. What are we? If you'd, I believe there's a laser pointer to right next to your material there, and you can either use the large screen over here or one of those. It might be easier to use the large screen. What are we looking at with the area that seems to fluoresce here? I was interested in these bright particles here and focused my scanning electron microscope on those areas. All right, and with respect to those areas, what were you able to determine? I was able to determine what elements were present on that area that I was examining. All right, and similarly, I'm going to back up to Exhibit 138 now, the previous one, and ask you, on this particular one, on a zoomed-in picture of that, there appears to be likewise some fluorescing material there. There is one bright particle there. I did not have access to this X-ray when I was doing my analysis, so I focused my attention in this area here and this area in here. All right, and were you able to make any determination as to what these substances were along that ridgeline that you've just identified? Most of the strongest elements that I found in these areas were calcium and phosphorus, which are the elements of bone. But in the upper area, in this area, I did detect traces of elemental lead. All right, when we say traces of elemental lead, what do you mean? Like I mentioned, the strongest elements that were present in that area were calcium and phosphorus, and those are the main elements of bone. And I would suspect to see them since I'm looking at a sample of bone. But I was also interested in seeing if I could detect any lead because this entrance defect interested me from a science standpoint, that that was indeed a bullet hole that I would be looking for any traces of lead metal. All right, and how many different locations along that area did you examine? I examined 3 areas in here and found elemental lead, and I examined 4 areas over here and I did not detect any elemental lead. All right, did you examine any other aspects of this particular item to determine whether there was any trace of elemental lead elsewhere on the exhibit? Yes, I did. Tell us about that. I purposely went to an area away from that entrance defect to get a background or a control sample of what elements I would suspect or would think to find in that area. And in that area, that control area away from that entrance defect, I did not detect any presence of elemental lead. So in terms, as a scientist, having looked at a control area and now having that knowledge and comparing it with the area near the defect, what does that suggest to you, or what does that tell you? That tells me that if I'm seeing lead in that entrance defect, that a source of that could be a bullet. All right, how many control areas did you utilize? I believe I took 4 control areas away from that entrance defect. All right, very good. In your experience, well, let me also ask, have you had any firearms training as part of your crime lab training? Yes, I do. And tell us about that. For about a year and 2 or 3 months in the year 2000, I did some cross training in the firearms unit, examining guns, preparing guns for destruction, test firing guns, recovering the bullets, doing bullet comparisons, cartridge case comparisons. All right, very good. I want to move on to the, well, before I do, let me ask you this question. With respect to item EJ, based on your findings of traces of elemental lead, your crime lab training, is that defect that you observed on that item consistent with having been caused by a high-speed projectile? Yes, it is. And why is that? What is it about the defect and your findings that leads you to that conclusion? From my experience in crime scenes and field response, pending autopsies, and giving training to law enforcement, that when something is shot with a bullet in the skull, you get this type of beveling on the surface from where the bullet impacts, and then you have that concave beveling on the inside surface that is very characteristic of a high-speed projectile, including bullets. All right, very good. Let's move on to the item KQ, and I think we have that as Exhibit 139. That's correct. All right, again, we're focusing in on the piece of the upper left-hand corner of this exhibit. Tell us about your examination of this particular fragment. I did have a photograph of this X-ray when I was doing my analysis of this item, and I focused my analysis in the area here. I took 4 samples, 1 here, 2, 3, and 4. All right, and with respect to those particular 4 areas, what did you find? In areas 1 and 2, the 2 strongest elements were calcium and phosphorus, and then the 3rd strongest element in that area was elemental lead. Item areas 3 and 4, the strongest element present was lead on these 2 areas. All right, and likewise, comparatively speaking, was there more or less lead associated with item KQ, Exhibit 139, than with item EJ, Exhibit 137? There was considerably more lead in this particular bone fragment, KQ, than there was in item EJ. Likewise, with respect to this particular item, did you test other areas of the fragment? In other words, did you develop control areas from which to make comparisons? Yes, I did. Tell us about that. Like in the previous item, I went to an area away from the defect, did not detect any lead present in those areas. All right, and so what did that tell you or signify to you relative to your findings of lead in and around the area perceived to be the defect? That finding lead in the area of this entrance defect associated with bright spots that are consistent with very dense metal that containing mainly lead, that it could have come from a bullet. All right, is the on microscopic examination, is that defect area which you identified as having traces of lead present or be more than traces of actual elemental lead present, is that consistent with a defect caused by a high-speed projectile? Yes, it is. All right, and why is that? As I mentioned earlier, that type of defect, striking hard bone, causes the beveling effects on the outside and on the inside surfaces that is consistent with a high-speed projectile such as a bullet. On this particular item, did you do both the inside and the outside? Yes, I did. First of all, so we're all clear, what do you mean inside and outside? Are we referring to the defect beveled area, or what are we referring to? I'm referring to the inner surface of the skull versus the outer surface. What we see in this exhibit, this is the inner surface here. So this is the inner beveling of that defect. And I did look at the other side, the outside surface. All right, and with respect to the outer outside area, what did you find relative to the presence or absence of lead? In the area inside of that bevel, I was able to detect elemental lead on the beveling on the outside surface. All right. Similarly, did you employ that same control technique on this outside as you did on the inside area? Yes, I did. All right. And what did that, if anything, indicate to you? I did not detect any lead in my control area. Is it fair to say then that the only traces or presence actually of lead were in and around the area identified as this defect? From what I examined, yes. All right, all right. Mr. Olson, the opinion that item EJ, the first one we examined, had traces of elemental lead associated with it, do you hold that opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty? Yes, I do. With respect to the item given crime lab designation KQ, do you hold the opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that item KQ contained elemental lead in and around that defect area? Yes, I do. Attorney Fallon, subject to the receipt of the 4 exhibits, 5, the CV 136 through 140, we move those into evidence and tender the witness for cross-examination. The court, yeah, my sheet shows that 132 through 135 had not yet been offered. Attorney Fallon, oh, well then I would make a motion that they be received as well. The court, any objection, gentlemen, to either of those motions? Attorney Freeman, Judge, we ask the court to reserve ruling on those at this time. I wish to be heard on a few of those. The court, all right. Cross-examination by Attorney Freeman.